You know, I was listening to hear how other Hasidim, prepare themselves for this Yom Tov. Yom Tov means it's a good day. It's a special day. I listen to a lot of people. Everyone's wise. Kulam chachamim. Everyone is wise. Everyone is understanding. Everyone is trying the best to do what they understand. One of the people that I listened to was Rabbi Lau, the former chief rabbi, and the reason why I'm bringing him in is because I want to share with you how radically different I saw it. Anyway, he writes that he was, driving in Tel Aviv or whatever it was. I think then he was the chief rabbi or something like that. Anyway, someone called him and said, "Did you hear the news? The Rebbe just left the world. And all of Israel wants to hear a response. You're the chief rabbi of Israel. We'll be calling you in 5 minutes," or something like that. So he didn't know what to say. What do you say when, the way Simon Jacobson says it, the way everyone says it, the sun sets, What are you supposed to say? So he asked his driver to move over, and he was thinking. 5 minutes later, I think it was Kol Yisrael, one of the big, called him up. What do you have to say hearing the news? So he coined something. He says, the Rebbe had no children, and yet tens of thousands of people are orphaned. And that was like a real chap. It was an insight that a person, a parent dies, you leave over orphans. If you have no children, who knows? Who cares? The Rebbe had no children physically, and yet tens of thousands of people literally felt orphaned. To his credit, he decided to fly in. This is 20 years ago. I actually remember very well, which I'll share with you soon. I remember the time very well, Saturday night. I remember coming home. I remember it very vividly, the whole thing. And so not at that time, the people in Israel, how could you not come into the Rebbe? So they basically mobbed El Al. And El Al says, we can't bump people, we have people, there was fist fights, And basically what they did was they chartered planes. And this rabbi, what's his name? Yisrael Meir, I think. His name is, he was on one of these chartered flights. And he flew in. He says, we only stayed in America for 3 hours. But we missed the funeral. So we landed at night on Sunday. And we went from, as you know, Kennedy Airport to Montefiore is just 15 minutes. And we went as a group. And he said it was dark. It was raining. A light drizzle. And everything was wet. And it was like really gloomy, to put an understatement. And he says, no one said a word. There was like a complete silence. We walked in to the aisle. And we saw a pile of letters. Help me, save us, everyone. When the Rebbe goes up to heaven with his neshama, wanted that the Rebbe should intercede on his behalf. And we walked in, he says, we saw the previous Rebbe, and then there was just a mound where the Rebbe was just laid to rest. And it was silent, no one knew what to say. And people were looking and looking. And he said there was one elder chassid that walked around once and then a second time. And then he stood in front of the mound and he shouted, Tata! Like that. Father. And he writes that it was interesting. Those one word that he said, Tata, actually expressed everything that the people didn't know what to say. And somehow he expressed it for them. This is my father. Tata. What he meant, I don't know. It could be, Tata, why did you leave us? Tata, how can you leave us? Tata, you didn't leave us. Tata, I refuse to acknowledge. But the word was Tata, Father. He said, we spent 3 hours and we left. And he ties it in with his first thought. His first thought was that we're orphaned. You have to have what's called a chassidish hergish, a chassidic feeling, and to my everlasting shame, that's not one of my strong points. Right? I don't talk about it because you're not supposed to talk about it. I'm supposed to be the rabbi. But it's chassidish hergish is something which is, it's a gift that chassidim have. And I'll tell you now where I come from. It was Saturday night. At that time, Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu had come. He was a speaker in the Sephardic shul. I already told the story about when I went to the shul, how he was machabed me. You sit over here, don't get up. I told that story already. And then, when I came home, I saw my wife standing and crying. At that time, we always used to, the first thing we did, Motzei Shabbos, was call up Beth Israel. They had a number. I shouldn't have to tell me what happened. I know what happened. So she said, I don't remember what she said. So I remember her. She was standing and crying. So I picked it up, and I heard the recording. Something about like with sadness, this and that. We have to say that the Rebbe is not with us anymore. So I put it down, and I didn't know what to feel. I didn't feel good. I didn't know what to feel. A couple of minutes later, Rabbi Ferris calls me. Because his oldest son, his bar mitzvah was on Gimel Tammuz. And he wanted to know, did you hear the news? I heard the news. What should I do for the bar mitzvah? I said, I don't know. Seems to me you're not supposed to celebrate. But call up New York. I think a lot of people lost it. He called up Rabbi Heller, who told him to make the bar mitzvah. So anyway. So I'm over there. What do you do when you hear such news? Not too long later, I get a phone call from Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu himself. He says, you're a Chabad chassid. You probably have an inn. I want to go to New York. So again, I didn't know how to respond. And chassidish hergish is one of the things that, of my many failings. Plus, I never had any money in those days. Now, not that I'm exactly that rich now, but then going to New York meant a lot of juggling. I said, Kvod Rav, I don't have an in. He said, what are you talking about? You're a shliach. Aren't you going in? I said, I don't think so. So he said, shalom, whatever it is. And he actually found a way to get in. He also came after the funeral. The next day, we used to make a mishaberach every single day for the Rabbi. I can make it quick. I'm just saying, I'm reliving it. I mean, I remember the whole thing. Anyway, I remember coming into the shul. It was on Geary Boulevard, and usually Rekim Mishaberach. And I said, "There's nothing to say. It's all over." And then I went to give a class of Tanya in Miriam DeVries' home. It was like surreal. It was like a make-believe world for me at that time. And I went to Miriam DeVries and I gave the class. And then every 20 minutes I ran out to watch CNN. I couldn't believe it. I mean, that's my Rebbe in a box. Couldn't see the Rebbe, and there was a kapata over him, a live feed, and I gave the class. Afterwards, I went to Berkeley, and Rabbi Ferris made a bar mitzvah. I walked in, I spent 10 minutes, I said, I can't be here, I'm sorry, and I wished him well, and I left. I came home. And everything else was a blur. The next day, Michael Krasny calls up, not him, someone from the thing that said that, it was big news. You're a Chabadnik, would you like to talk? I said, yeah. So I went on Michael Krasny's show. Rabbi Pierce was there from Emmanuel. And I'd never been on radio before. And I was still in a no man's world. And Rabbi Pierce is a gentleman. He starts off the show by saying, I want to offer my condolences to the Chabad movement. So I remember saying that, I have the tape somewhere, I don't know where it is. I remember saying, I thank you very much for your kind wishes, but it's not necessary. He said, why is it not necessary? Because the Rebbe is still with us. So Michael Krasny got involved. Did you see the funeral? I said, yes, but we have a teaching from the Tanya where a tzaddik that dies doesn't really die. It's just an appearance. So Pierce, to his credit, knew a little bit. So he says, well, Even the great Rabbi Akiva was mistaken with Bar Kochba. I said, no, he wasn't mistaken. He was the right guy for other reasons. It was only a half hour. Come home, I'm still not getting it. But I realized that someone has to say something. So Aaron Saruya at that time was part of the group, So a bunch of people called up and say, Rabbi Hecht, what are you going to do? Well, you have to say something. So I said, fine, come tonight and we'll talk. So we had, so to speak, a full crowd, maybe 40 people. And I remember till today, I got up there and I said, I'm supposed to speak to you about something, which in my wildest dreams, I never had an idea that I would have to say something. How can I speak about my Rebbe in the past? So I said, instead what I'm going to teach you all is Zach. I'm going to teach you the Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe talks about that the life of a tzaddik is faith. And after I finished teaching that, for them and for myself, I quoted the Gemara Ksubis, that Rebbe would come, believe it or not, I was ahead of the game, and I said that he's going to come and make Kiddush. What?
You're still in Tashim Yud.
Yeah. And nothing, and I gave it over and finished. The next day, I'm reading, everyone in the world is going to New York, and you stupid donkey, you don't understand that you're supposed to be going to New York. So anyway, what happened was, I waited for the last day, and on the 7th day, I flew to New York. So I flew to New York, and I got off, Kennedy Airport, and I went straight to the oil. And I walked in, they put the matzeva on the 7th day. And I walked in, and I've gone to the oil many times, seeing the previous Rebbe, and it was a shock. And I read the matzeva, and I didn't understand what was happening. I know I cried a little. Matzeva means the monument. I know I cried a little bit, but no big spiel. You cried a little bit. And then I just looked. I spent there maybe 20 minutes, and I said, "What am I doing here? I don't get it. Like the Rebbe's not here." And I should have gone home that night, but my back was hurting, so I went back the next day. And I couldn't figure out what was I feeling. What was I feeling? It was grief, it was shock, it was sadness, and it wasn't any of them, because unfortunately, since then, I lived through the death of 2 parents. And I was not feeling for the Rebbe what I felt, by my parents. So I didn't know what I was feeling. I came to New York, and I then realized Crown Heights. I realized then what I was feeling. I was walking down the street. Usually Chassidim, Shalom Aleichem, welcome, you came to the Kinus. It's like joy. The whole world came to Crown Heights, because not everyone could make it for the funeral. So during the whole 7 days, people were coming. What are you coming for? So I noticed, to me at least, I was walking the street, no one said anything to anyone. And people averted their gaze. It's like you looked at the person and you went like that. Because they didn't know what to say. And then I realized what I was feeling. I was feeling shame, embarrassment. I was feeling ashamed that we couldn't hold the Rebbe here. Boishas, I was partially embarrassed. There's basically 2 words that we always use: guilt and embarrassment. Guilt is not positive. Embarrassment is. What's the difference between the 2? A person that feels guilty essentially is not motivated to change anything. It happened, I didn't do it, or I should have done it, and I didn't, and there's nothing you could do about it, and that's it. And you know what? There are certain people that make a living out of guilt. They perpetuate guilt, and then they absolve you of it. So if you go to some goyish guy, that they used to say, nothing beats a good confession. You come in front of a screen, and you say, "Oh, Father, I have sinned." I feel terrible. He listens. You feel guilty. Yeah, okay. Give a little tzedakah to the church, and you're forgiven. It's easy to get rid of guilt because guilt doesn't do anything for you. Shame burns. It's burning. It's not guilt. It's shame. How can you? I don't understand you. You're better than this. How did you allow yourself to do this? And you can't just say, well, I did it. And I feel guilty about it, because the feeling doesn't go away. The feeling gets deeper and deeper. And that's why tshuva is the same letters as baishas. Right? Teshuva is baishas. Or Shabbos is also toshuv, which is also baishas. Beis, shim, shin, and tov. Shame. I realized then that, I don't know, I didn't have the hergish, I didn't have the feeling that so many other holy tzaddikim had. I lost my father. I didn't have that feeling at all. I don't say it's good that I didn't have the feeling. I just didn't. But I was embarrassed so much. Like, I don't get it. The Rebbe just left us. It's like, why weren't we either important enough, or why weren't we capable enough of keeping him to be the Mashiach? It's not the Rebbe's issue, it's our issue. And I realize that every chassid has his way of looking at the Rebbe. I often listen with amazement and happiness. I looked into the Rebbe's eyes and they went right through me, and it was like beautiful. I felt the chemistry, I felt this, I felt that. I know, I always felt so embarrassed. I could never look the Rebbe in the eye. I had never seen the Rebbe so clearly until I watched Living Torah. I used to be somewhere in the back of 770, not because I chose to be, but that's just the way I got the place. And for years I would see the Rebbe from the distance. I never saw it really clear. And it was very rare that I actually picked up my cup and said L'chaim. And then in my stupidity, if he didn't say L'chaim right away, I right away hit myself. Didn't like this about me. You know what I mean? I said, okay, I'm not going to stick my ugly face in it. I don't think it's necessarily good, but I also don't think it's necessarily bad. I think a lot of people felt that way. He's a ish kadosh v'nera, a truly awesome holy person. What are you doing in front of his face? So the answer is, he's my Rebbe. He is my Rebbe. Okay, but if he's my Rebbe, that means he gave me kaiches, he gives me powers. How can I justify my existence in front of such a person? When people went to the Beis HaMikdash, I don't believe they came and they said, here I am! Here, look at me, I brought a sin offering. Guess what? I ate not kosher by mistake. Look at me. He probably walked in like a shriveling little worm, like this, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, please, thank you, and walked away. I don't believe that he was proud that he was in the Beis HaMikdash bringing a chatas, bringing a sin offering. The flip side is that this too becomes a cop-out. Sure, it's easy to feel ashamed and then just not show up. That's why I prefaced it by saying having the Chassidish Hergish is a gift. In my days, not everyone stayed up a whole night when the Rebbe was there. And I was not one of those that stayed up a whole night. But there were those that did. There were those that didn't do anything unless they saw the Rebbe. That's a Chassidish Hergish. In a way, that's a tata. There's a personal relationship to a father. When the relationship is to a great extent based on a sense of we're so much more capable than what we're doing, it's a different feeling. There are pluses and many, many minuses. It was just interesting. It comes Gimel Tammuz. It's 20 years. Okay, so what are we supposed to be talking about? I read a fair amount. We're supposed to be talking about what the Rebbe said. We're supposed to emphasize the Rebbe's love to every single Jew. We're supposed to talk about the Rebbe's vision, to bring Mashiach. We're supposed to talk about, I'm not sure, Ashreinu Matev Chalkeinu, the Rebbe's miracles, a little bit. They don't even push the Rebbe's miracles so much. If you just read the stuff they're putting out, it's the Rebbe as a world leader. What are Chassidim supposed to Farbrengen about? Everything. One of the things is that we are where we are right now because we didn't do what we were supposed to do. And God forbid that there should be the 21st anniversary. There should never have been a 20th anniversary if we would have done what we're supposed to do. There has to be I think there has to be a sense of baishas, of simple embarrassment. I saw a very interesting vart from Rabbi Wagner. He sends it out. A very interesting vart. It's prefaced with a story. The story is from, I forget his first name. Last name is, I think, Perman. So this is a story that this guy, Perman himself, this guy, I'll call him Michal, I'm not sure his first name. So the story goes that, Ger, which is a big Hasidic dynasty in Israel, so the Rebbes of Ger actually came to the Rebbe, not the Beis Yisrael, but the Lev Simcha, and then his brother, Pinchas Menachem. So when the Lev Simcha came, he comes in the Polish custom is to come with an entourage. So we came with an entourage of Hasidim, and they were all welcomed by the Rebbe. As a matter of fact, the Rebbe said, in honor of the great of my great guest, I'll even give shulim. I'll even shake hands. So one of the young men came out and said to this guy Michal Perman, he says, I want to tell you something about your Rebbe. 21 years ago, I wrote him a letter, and my name is Alta. There's a whole story behind the word Alta. In Yiddish, you know what the word Alta means? Old. It means old. And basically, when people would die young, they used to give him a nickname, Chaim or Alta. And in the Ger dynasty, the first Rebbe lost a lot of children, so Alta became one of the names that Ger Chassidim used. Pinchas Menachem Alta. Anyway, so there was this guy, a Ger Chassid, who wrote the Rebbe. I'm not sure if he wrote the Rebbe or he actually saw the Rebbe, and he said, and when he signed his name Aleph Lamed Tes Reish, not tough, but Tes. So the Rebbe asked him, "You spell Alter with a Tes?" I thought, as if to say, probably it's with a tough. Is that how they spell it in Ger? Maybe you should find out. 21 years passed. And he comes back now as a young, and he's not young, he's as a middle-aged married man, and he's coming part of the entourage with the Ger Rebbe. And the Rebbe is shaking hands with all of his people. And as each one that shook the hand said the name, Chaim Yankel ben Yosef, Chaim Yankel. And he said something Alter ben whatever. So the Rebbe looked at him, no, is it with a test or with a tough? So he was like nishleimim, he was astonished. 21 years had passed, and the Rebbe continued the conversation as if he had just left him. And during these 21 years, do you have any idea of how many thousands, literally thousands of people that the Rebbe had intimate conversations with, and maybe many thousands of letters that he read, and that he should remember this man's name, and yes, and just continue? Amazing. Incidentally, about the Rebbe's memory, which is beyond understanding, I could tell you something that happened when I was 13 years old. I've said it before. When I was 13 years old, we were allowed to go into Yechidus, but not alone. So I went in with my parents. The Rebbe spent maybe 22 seconds with me, and the rest of the time with my parents. I think 22 seconds is also too much. I was very, very short. He looked at me, and then he talked to my parents. But this I remember. My grandfather was not feeling well, so my mother, of blessed memory, she's a funny lady, She didn't know how to talk to Rebbes. She was a really nice lady, but she didn't know how to speak to Rebbes. She said, Rebbe, I want a bracha that my father should be 10 years younger. So the Rebbe smiled and said, asking a bracha to make a man 10 years younger is interfering with nature. However, I'll give him a bracha that he should be gesund. That's what he told my mother. It was not a Lubavitcher. She came from Austria-Hungary. So, but this is what I remember as a 13-year-old pisher. The Rebbe then said, Baruch ben Eliyahu. Now, my grandfather was not a Lubavitcher. He visited the Rebbe only once in his lifetime. Only once. And that was when my father got married. He never came to a Farbrengen, and he never wrote the Rebbe. His Rebbe actually was Satmar, believe it or not. He wore the Streimel and everything else. How, I remember as a 13-year-old, how did the Rebbe remember my grandfather, who was not Chabad? He knew the name, Baruch ben Eliyahu. Is it memory? No. Let me ask you a question. How many of you remember your first grade class by name?
Our first what? The teacher?
The kids. Your best friend that used to play marbles with. The one that used to steal his lunch. You don't remember his name. You do. Yeah, you're better than me. I don't. I used to steal his lunch. You know, how many people remember, these type of people? Very few. But if I ask you how many people remember the name of their children, it should be a very high level. Is it possible to forget the name of your children? Unfortunately, I can tell you it's true. It is possible. But how about forgetting the name of your wife? That's dangerous. Very dangerous.
Can be lethal.
It could be lethal, yes. They say as a joke, there was a great-granddaughter that used to come to her great-grandfather in the old age home. And grandpa and grandma were living in the old age home, like assisted living. And every time grandma would come, he would say, "Darling, thank you so much." And then she would, come and say, "Dearest, you're the best." So the great-granddaughter was like really amazed. Says, "Grandpa, how do you see such goodness? And how do you keep your love so strong?" He says, "How do you know I love her so much?" He says, "You keep on calling her darling and dear and he says, "I can't remember the name." Alzheimer's. Okay, but anyway, most people don't forget the name. But when you forget your own name, that's really bad. That's really bad. And I could tell you what it says in our tradition. When you die, you forget your name. But no one forgets their name. I was thinking, the Rebbe didn't forget a name, not because he had a memory, because he didn't forget his own name. But you see, because the Rebbe's neshama included all of the neshamas. So when he saw Eliyahu ben Baruch, he saw like his finger. What? Baruch ben Eliyahu.
I remember before you said 5 minutes ago.
You got a tremendous rabbi. You guys got something together. Anyway, the point of it is that a Rebbe remembers because it's him. He remembers himself. By remembering himself, he remembers all of us. I forget where we were going with this. Oh, thank you. So Rabbi Wagner ends off, says, let's say the Rebbe gets up tonight. What do you think he's going to say to us? He's going to say, when I left you, I was talking about Avos Yisrael. No, what's happening? The fact that 20 years passed is not important. The Rebbe is going to want to resume the conversation that he had with us 20 years ago. He says, I remember distinctly that 20 years ago I told you about that the Mashiach is about to come and it's up to you. No? So tell me the news. That's really something. If the Rebbe could remember 21 years where the person's name is with a tuf or with a tes, and countless examples, I shared with you one that happened that I remember myself, but countless examples of where the Rebbe could resume a conversation, could remember something that happens years later, what are we going to say? So the truth of the matter is, on a positive note, we're going to say, Rebbe, look, we did what you told us to do. More than you even imagine. Look, the world is filled with light. There isn't a Chabad house in the world that's not functioning. Jews have changed. Your former misnagdim opponents are all chassidim today. Every one of them is doing outreach. Every one of them is singing songs in the middle of davening. Every one of them is talking about the coming of Mashiach. So, Rebbe, we did it. We're victorious. Thank God that you're back. So now let's go to Israel. That's certainly one of the scenarios. And I'm hoping that that's the way it will be. But there's another way to look at it also. The way I always felt, like an idiot. I can't look the Rebbe in his eyes because I'm scared to look in his face. What's he going to see? So okay, 20 years, I'm here 20 some odd years in the city. So what did you do already? I think that's a question every Chabad has to ask. So what did you do already? Got this guy, got that guy. What about yourself? What about your own family? It's not negative. It's positive. The point of it is, Beishas has to remind us of something. A little shame is healthy. A little shame, a little embarrassment. Anyway, l'chaim everybody. From the Beishas, it should turn into Toshav, to return to Hashem with joy. L'chaim l'bracha, l'chaim.